How did my wife's one-night overtime shift turn into a hospital call saying she crashed with another man? My name is Graham Holt, and I've spent most of my adult life reading patterns that other people call bad luck. I work in insurance claims, which means I get paid to separate accidents from choices and choices from lies. People love the word accident. It makes them feel innocent. It makes them feel forgiven before anyone even asks the question. The night my wife lied to me, she used the cleanest cover story on earth. Work. Overtime. A last-minute problem only she could fix. She said it with that tired, responsible tone that makes you feel guilty for even blinking. She moved around the kitchen like she was already late, like the world would fall apart if she didn't throw on her coat and run out the door. I didn't argue. Not because I believed her, but because I've learned what arguing does. It gives liars rehearsal time. It gives them a reason to frame you as controlling. It gives them a nice little story to tell later about how you were suspicious for no reason. So I did what I always do when something feels off. I let the moment pass, and I watched what remained. She left her phone face down on the counter while she grabbed her keys. That should have been my first laugh of the night. Jenna never left her phone out of reach unless she wanted me to see something. If the phone is face down, it means the screen is dangerous. If the screen is dangerous, it means the person holding the phone isn't just hiding a message, they're hiding a life. She kissed my cheek like a habit, not like a choice. She said she would be back late. She said she was sorry. She said she loved me. The usual soft patting around a sharp truth. I nodded. I told her to be safe. I watched her leave. The apartment got quiet in the way it always does after a lie. Not peaceful, just empty. Quiet has different flavors when you've been married long enough. There's the quiet after a good day, where you can breathe. Then there's the quiet where your brain keeps replaying a sentence because it didn't land right. That quiet tastes metallic. I cleaned the kitchen, not because it needed cleaning, but because my hands always want something to do when my mind starts circling. I rinsed a mug that was already clean. I wiped a counter that didn't have a crumb on it. I made myself a sandwich and realized I wasn't hungry. I scrolled the news and didn't read a word. At midnight, I checked the time and realized she hadn't sent a single update. Jenna always updated when she wanted to look dependable. A quick message, a small complaint, a fake sigh typed into pixels. This time, there was nothing. That absence was louder than any confession. I told myself not to spiral. That's the funny thing about being a calm man. People think calm means naive. Calm is not naive. Calm is discipline. It's waiting until you can see the full shape of the problem before you touch it. At 1:10 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered because unknown numbers at 1:10 a.m. don't bring good news. They bring the kind of news that changes your face. The voice on the other end was professional, clipped, tired in the way hospital staff get tired when they've seen the same story 1,000 times. The caller said they were calling from the emergency department. They asked if I was Jenna Holt's husband. They asked if I could confirm her date of birth. They said she had been in an accident. For a second, the room tilted, not from shock, but from the sudden confirmation that my gut had been right. I gave the information they needed. I asked if she was alive. The voice said yes. Injured, but stable. Then the voice added something that didn't fit in the box my mind had prepared. They said she arrived with a man. Not an ambulance crew. Not a coworker from her overtime shift. Not a neighbor who happened to be nearby. A man who wasn't me. A man who stayed with her through intake. A man whose name was on the form as the person who brought her in. They said his name like it was routine. Elliot Price. I didn't ask them to repeat it. I didn't need to. That name had a smooth, expensive ring to it, like someone who doesn't wait in lines, like someone who expects doors to open. The caller said Jenna was asking for me. They said she wanted me to come in. They said she was upset and confused and needed family present. They said it in the careful way people say things when they're not supposed to judge, but they've already judged anyway. I thanked them. I told them I would call back. Then I ended the call and sat down on the edge of the couch like my legs had decided for me. In claims, you learn that the first story is never the full story. You learn that someone always tries to manage the narrative before the facts can speak. The trick is to let the facts speak first. Facts are terrible at being polite. Facts don't care if you're in pain. Facts don't care if you're embarrassed. Facts just sit there, heavy and true. I looked around my living room at the framed photo of our wedding day on the shelf. Jenna had chosen that photo because it made her look luminous. I had chosen it because it made her look real. Now it looked like a prop from a different man's life. My hands went cold, not from fear, from focus. I didn't go to the hospital. That's the part people love to judge. They picture her in a bed, bruised, scared, and they want me to be the villain for staying home. They want a simple moral story. Husband abandons injured wife. Husband is cruel. Wife is fragile. Everyone cries. End scene. But I knew something at 1:12 a.m. that I couldn't unknow. Jenna wasn't in that hospital because she told the truth and got unlucky. Jenna was in that hospital because she lied on purpose and got caught by physics. You can't negotiate with physics. You can't charm physics. You can't cry your way out of physics. A car hits something, and suddenly every excuse you built becomes just noise in the air. I went into the bedroom and opened the closet. Her work bag was hanging there, untouched. Her badge lanyard was still looped through the side pocket, the kind of detail that would mean nothing to someone who trusts. To me, it meant everything. I didn't call her, I didn't text, I didn't ask why. Instead, I did something small and boring. I opened my notes app and typed a line. Day, time, hospital call, unknown number, name stated as companion, Elliot Price. Then I saved it. People think revenge is an explosion. Most of the time, it's a ledger. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from Jenna. Not a long one, not a sob story. Just a quick push, like she wanted to force me to move before I could think. She said she was hurt. She said she needed me. She asked why I wasn't answering. She said she didn't understand why I was acting like this. I read it twice, not because it was complicated, but because it was familiar. Jenna loved confusion when she was guilty. Confusion creates room. Confusion makes you explain yourself. The second you explain yourself, you're the one on trial. I didn't answer. Another message came in. She said the doctors wanted a family member. She said Elliot was just someone who helped. She said there was no reason to make this worse. Someone who helped. At 1 a.m. on a night she claimed she was working. I set my phone down and walked to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water and didn't drink it. I stood there in the soft hum of the refrigerator and felt the shape of my marriage change. There's a moment in every betrayal where your brain tries to protect you by offering softer interpretations. Maybe she carpooled. Maybe she got a ride from a coworker. Maybe she was assaulted. Maybe she's too scared to explain. Maybe. But then you remember the work bag in the closet. You remember the badge still at home. You remember the silence before the hospital called, and the maybes start to die one by one. I went back to the living room and opened our shared calendar on my laptop. It wasn't a spy move. It was our calendar. Appointments, dinner plans, birthdays, dentist visits, the boring scaffolding of domestic life. Jenna's overtime wasn't on it, of course. That's not the point. The point is what she had been careful to schedule and what she had been careful not to schedule. There was a block on her day labeled Team Coverage. She had added it that afternoon. No details, no address, no contact person. Just a block of time. It was the kind of vague calendar event someone makes when they want to claim their time is accounted for without actually accounting for it. I stared at it and smiled, just once, because it was so Jenna. She didn't just lie. She left the lie on the table like a decorative centerpiece and expected me to admire it. I took a screenshot and saved it into a folder on my desktop. I created the folder right then and named it something plain. Timeline. Then I did the second boring thing. I checked our bank account. Not because I thought she had drained it in one night, but because money always leaves footprints. It's hard to be deceitful in a world full of receipts. There was a charge pending, not huge, but clear. A late-night purchase from a convenience store near the highway. The kind of purchase you make when you're leaving one place and heading to another. The kind of purchase you make when you're not at work. I didn't dispute it. I didn't call the bank. Not yet. I took a screenshot, saved it, and typed another line into my notes. Day, time, merchant, location hint. My phone vibrated again. Jenna called. I let it ring until it stopped. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't punishing her with silence like a teenager. I was refusing to give her a live audience. Jenna could perform for nurses, for Elliot, for anyone. I was not going to be her stage. A voicemail came in. I didn't play it, because I already knew what it would be. Pain, fear, confusion, accusation, love, anything that could drag me into an emotional exchange where the facts get smeared. I turned my laptop toward the window and watched the city lights blink in the distance. Somewhere out there, my wife was in a hospital bed asking people why her husband wasn't coming to hold her hand. And somewhere out there, Elliot Price was standing close enough to look like he belonged. I tried the name again in my mind. Elliot Price. It sounded like a man who wore clean shoes and never apologized. It sounded like a man who knew exactly how much influence he had. My mind reached for the one practical question that matters in any mess. Who benefits? Jenna benefits if I show up and act normal. She benefits if I sit by her bed and let her rewrite the night into a harmless misunderstanding. She benefits if the hospital staff sees me as the supportive husband, because that gives her credibility later. It gives her a witness for her own narrative. Elliot benefits if I show up too, in a different way. If I show up angry, he can frame me as unstable. If I show up pleading, he can frame me as weak. If I show up confused, he can frame me as gullible. No matter what I do in that room, I give him something. So I stayed home. At 2:40 a.m., I received a message from an unfamiliar account. No name, just a number. The message was short, almost clinical. It asked if I was Graham. It said Jenna was safe. It said I should come in the morning if I wanted to talk. It didn't sign off with Elliot's name, but it didn't need to. It carried itself like a man used to directing traffic. I saved it too. Then I finally played Jenna's voicemail, but only after I'd written the timestamp down. Her voice was strained and wet and angry. She sounded like someone who couldn't decide whether to beg or attack. She said she needed me. She said I was being cruel. She said she couldn't believe I would abandon her. She said she didn't know what she did to deserve this. There it was, not an apology, not a confession, a question designed to make me explain, a question designed to make me the one who's wrong. I ended the playback and set the phone down carefully, like it might bite. I went to the bedroom again and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the empty pillow beside mine. Jenna's side was always a little messier. She would laugh at that if we were in one of our good weeks. Now it looked like the absence of a person who had been living two lives and finally got tripped by the curb. I didn't feel joy. I felt clarity. Clarity is colder than anger and much more useful. By the time the sun started to lighten the blinds, I had a small file of timestamps and screenshots, and I had one decision made. I was not going to be dragged into her hospital drama without a plan. I would visit eventually. Not to comfort her, not to rage, not to plead. I would visit when the visit served the truth. And as I stood in the kitchen with the first gray light creeping in, my phone buzzed again with a new message from Jenna. This one was shorter, sharper, more desperate. She asked why I hated her. She asked why I wouldn't come. She asked what Elliot told me. That last part was the first honest thing she'd said all night, because it confirmed he was there, close enough to speak for her, close enough to shape her panic. I didn't answer. I opened my notes and typed one more line. She referenced Elliot directly, morning after crash. Then I saved it and stared at the screen, because I could feel the next phase of this story trying to start. If my wife had only cheated, she would have begged and cried and blamed the accident. But if Elliot Price had enough power to show up and manage her, then this wasn't just a betrayal. It was an operation. I went to the hospital at noon, not at sunrise. I wanted staff awake and policies followed. I parked in the far garage, away from cameras and pity. I wore a plain jacket so nobody could read me. I left my wedding ring on because it mattered later. I walked in slow, like I belonged in bad news. The lobby smelled like sanitizer and burnt coffee. The TVs played cheerful weather, like a joke. The receptionist asked why I was there. I gave my wife's name and date of birth. She looked at her screen, then at my face. Her eyes did a small calculation, then she smiled politely. Polite people hide their opinions behind clipboards. She handed me a visitor sticker and a directions card. She told me the floor and the wing. She asked if I was family. I said yes, and I let it hang. I did not add husband because labels can be used. I walked to the elevator and watched the doors close. The elevator chime sounded like a verdict. On the third floor, the waiting area was half full. A man slept in a chair, mouth open, defeat visible. A woman held a paper bag of oranges, hope visible. A kid scrolled a phone, pretending nothing mattered. I sat where I could see the corridor entrance. I kept my hands still, like a good witness. After 5 minutes, a nurse walked out with a clipboard. She scanned the room and called my wife's name. I stood. She looked surprised that I existed. Then she nodded toward the corridor. She asked if I was her husband. I said yes, and her mouth tightened a fraction. The hospital had already heard the overnight version. She led me down a hall lined with curtains. Machines beeped with steady indifference. Nurses moved like tired professionals, not like angels. The nurse said my wife was stable. She said bruising, a mild concussion, and observation. She said no surgery, no ICU, no miracles needed. She did not mention the man from the intake form. That omission was information. She stopped at a door with a glass panel. She told me to keep the visit calm. She said my wife was emotional and confused. She said it as if confusion caused the crash. She opened the door and stepped aside. Jenna was in a bed with her hair pulled back. Her face had a small bruise near the cheekbone. Her lips were dry. She looked smaller than usual, like her confidence had leaked out. Then she saw me and her eyes brightened instantly. Not relief, not love, just opportunity. She reached out her hand, and I did not take it. I stayed near the foot of the bed. I kept my posture relaxed but distant. I asked how she felt in the plainest tone possible. She said she was scared. She said she thought she was going to die. She said she kept calling for me. She asked why I did not come. I told her I got the call late. I told her I needed facts first. I did not ask about Elliot. I let the silence do its job. Jenna filled silence with performance when she was guilty. She said she did not understand what happened. She said she left work and everything went wrong. She said a driver ran a light. She said she was not thinking clearly. She said she needed me to stop acting cold. She said my distance was hurting her more than the crash. I nodded once, slow and neutral. I asked which hospital she worked at overnight. She blinked, then said it did not matter. She said the staffing office moved her last minute. She said she could not remember the unit. She said she was disoriented from the crash. I asked what time she left her shift. She said late. I asked how late. She said after midnight. I asked who drove her to the hospital. She said she came by ambulance. The words came out too fast, like she had practiced. I glanced at the small table beside her bed. Her purse sat open, not fully zipped. Her phone was face down, like at home. A charging cable ran from the wall to the device. She kept one hand close to it, like a guard dog. I could almost respect the instinct if it was not aimed at me. A doctor stepped into the room and introduced himself. He asked if I was family. Jenna answered for me, quickly, calling me her husband. The doctor explained the plan again, calmly. He asked Jenna if she had any pain. He asked about dizziness and nausea. He advised rest and observation. He spoke to me as if I mattered, then left. As soon as the door closed, Jenna changed tone. She asked if I talked to anyone. She asked what they told me. She asked if I believed her. She asked why I was staring at her phone. She said I was being paranoid and unfair. I told her I was not staring, I was noticing. I asked why her work bag was still at home. Her throat moved once. She said she forgot it in the rush. She said she planned to borrow supplies at work. She said it was not a big deal. She said I always made things a big deal. I asked where her badge was. She said in her bag. I told her the bag was at home. She said maybe she left it in the car. Then she remembered she did not drive. Then she said she did not know where it was. Her story kept shifting, like it had loose screws. I did not accuse. I did not raise my voice. I simply asked for one clear timeline. Jenna hated timelines because timelines do not care about charm. She started crying, as if tears could erase timestamps. She said she was hurt and scared and alone. She said I was punishing her when she needed me. She said if I loved her, I would just sit and hold her hand. She said we could talk later, after she healed. That last line mattered. Later. Always later. Later is a liar's favorite place. A knock sounded, and the door opened again. A man stepped in without hesitation, like he belonged. Tall, neat hair, expensive watch, calm face built for committees. He carried a coffee cup and a small bouquet, like he was checking boxes. Jenna's eyes jumped to him, then back to me. Her jaw tightened. The room became smaller. The man glanced at me once, then looked at Jenna. He asked how she was doing, in a smooth, practiced tone. I did not introduce myself. I did not need to. He knew who I was. The way he stood told me he knew. He positioned himself closer to her head than I was, like a defender. The coffee was for her, not for staff. The flowers were a prop, not a gift. Jenna said his name quietly, like a warning. Elliot Price. There it was, on her tongue, finally real. He looked at me with polite concern, like he was trying to calm a difficult husband. He said he was sorry for the situation. He said he happened to be nearby. He said he helped Jenna when she needed help. He said this was all a misunderstanding. I kept my expression blank. I asked how he knew where she was admitted. He said the hospital system notified him because of his role. He said he oversaw patient relations and compliance. He said he was making sure she was cared for properly. That was clever. Professional cover, plausible on paper. Also a problem. It meant his power was not only personal, it was institutional. Jenna watched me closely, waiting for anger. Elliot watched me closely, waiting for a mistake. They both wanted the same thing, a reaction they could frame later. I did not give them one. I asked Jenna one question, calmly. I asked why her intake form listed Elliot as the person who brought her. Jenna froze for half a second, then said the nurse must have made a mistake. She said the ambulance crew must have filled it wrong. She said Elliot only visited after she arrived. Elliot nodded, too fast, like a trained teammate. He said paperwork errors happened all the time. He said the priority was her recovery. He said we should not fight in a hospital room. I agreed, and that agreement made them both uneasy. They expected resistance, not compliance. Compliance is scary when it comes with a calm stare. I stepped back and looked at Jenna's phone again. The screen lit up for a second with a new notification. Jenna moved her hand instantly, trying to hide it, but the preview was already visible. The notification showed a contact name and a line of text. The name was a heart emoji and the initials EP. The text was short and possessive. It asked if she was safe and if I was behaving. Jenna slapped the phone screen dark, like she could unshow it. Elliot's posture tightened. He did not look at the phone, but his jaw moved once. He knew what I saw. I reached into my pocket slowly and pulled out my own phone. I did it openly, so nobody could claim secrecy. I pretended to check a message, then angled my screen toward the glass panel on the wall. The reflection showed Jenna's phone in my camera view for a moment. I pressed the side button and took a screenshot, capturing the lock screen preview reflection. It was not elegant. It did not need to be. It was lawful, brief, and enough. The proof did not have to be perfect. It had to be real. Jenna saw my phone and her eyes widened. She asked what I just did. She said I was invading her privacy. She said she could not believe I would do that. She said I was making things worse. I asked her why a privacy claim mattered more than the truth. She started crying again, louder this time. Elliot stepped forward slightly, as if to block me. He did not touch me. He did not need to. The room was full of witnesses, and he knew it. A nurse appeared at the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. She asked if everything was okay. Jenna said yes, too quickly. Elliot smiled and thanked the nurse for checking. He said Jenna was under stress. I told the nurse I was leaving. I told her Jenna needed rest. I said it calmly, like a responsible husband. Jenna stared at me, stunned. Elliot's smile flickered for a moment, then returned. I walked out without another question. I did not slam the door. I did not announce anything. I let them sit with the silence because silence makes liars talk to each other. In the corridor, my hands stayed steady. My heart did not. Betrayal is not an abstract idea when it stands beside your wife's bed holding coffee. It becomes physical. It becomes a smell, a sound, a posture. I went to a quiet alcove near the vending machines. I opened my screenshot and zoomed in. The reflection was clear enough. The contact label, the initials, the possessive line. A preview that tied them together in a way they could not explain away. I created a new folder inside Timeline and named it Lock Screen. I moved the screenshot there. Then I made a note in my ledger. Lock screen preview captured, corridor time, hospital floor, device charging. My phone vibrated again. A bank notification appeared. A charge attempt. A motel chain, not local, with a late-night timestamp. The same kind of footprint as the convenience store. The kind of footprint that said this was not a single bad decision. This was a pattern. I did not dispute it yet. I saved the alert. I logged the time. Then I looked down the corridor back toward Jenna's room and felt a cold clarity settle into place. She did not just lie to cheat. She lied like she was protecting a system. And Elliot Price looked like the kind of man who built systems for a living. I drove home like I was transporting glass. Not fast, not slow, just careful enough to avoid making a decision with adrenaline. The screenshot sat in my phone like a small bomb, quiet and legal. People think proof needs to be dramatic. It doesn't. Proof just needs to survive denial. At the first red light, my bank app sent another push alert. Same merchant family, same late-night pattern, different amount. It was almost comical, like the universe had decided to help, but only in the most boring way possible. Convenience store, motel, then a second attempt that looked like a test. Someone was checking what still worked. I didn't call Jenna, I didn't call Elliot, I didn't call anyone. I saved the alert, then I turned notifications off. I wanted control, not a drip feed of panic. When I got home, the apartment smelled exactly the same as it had 12 hours earlier. That irritated me more than it should have. A normal living room is a cruel place when your life is splitting in half. I set my keys down, washed my hands like I'd touched something dirty, then opened my laptop. I created one folder, then another. Timeline, lock screen, banking, calendar, notes. It wasn't revenge yet. It was preparation. A person can claim anything in a heated conversation. A folder doesn't raise its voice. A folder doesn't get tired. A folder doesn't forget. First, I pulled up the bank alerts and took clean screenshots with date and time visible. Then I logged each one into a simple table. Day, time, merchant, amount, location hint, and what Jenna had told me she was doing. It looked worse on a screen than it did in my head. That's the benefit of writing lies down. They start to smell. Then I opened the shared account page. The account had both our names on it. That was the part that made me laugh, short and humorless. Jenna loved the symbolism of sharing. She hated the discipline of it. She had always described the account as our future. In reality, it was a funnel. I checked the last 90 days. Rent payments came out regularly, utilities came out regularly, a handful of groceries, basic subscriptions, predictable patterns. Then the outliers popped up like bruises, small cash withdrawals, random rideshare charges, late-night food deliveries to unfamiliar areas. Emergency purchases she had never mentioned, always followed by some vague apology and a promise to be better. I hovered over the transactions and felt something hard settle behind my ribs. This wasn't just infidelity. Infidelity was the obvious offense, the thing people gossip about. Money misuse is quieter, uglier, and usually more intentional. I clicked into our direct deposits. My paycheck landed first, like clockwork. Jenna's deposit, when it happened, was smaller and irregular. She liked telling stories about her workload and her long shifts, but her deposits never looked like someone pulling real overtime. That disconnect mattered. In claims, that disconnect is how fraud starts. Someone's life doesn't match their numbers. When life and numbers diverge, the truth is living in the gap. I pulled up the last few months and compared her deposit days to her calendar blocks. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. She had marked plenty of shifts, but her deposits did not line up. She had marked plenty of coverage, but the pay didn't reflect it. Either she was lying about hours, or she wasn't getting paid for the hours she claimed. Both options were bad. I wrote one line on paper because paper feels more final than a screen. I wrote, "I am not funding a second life." Then I did the first clean cut. I removed Jenna's saved card access from the shared payment apps. Streaming services, food delivery, ride shares, anything tied to my name or the joint card. I didn't cancel the utilities. I didn't shut off the lights. I wasn't trying to be theatrical. I just closed the doors she had been walking through. I canceled her authorized user status on my primary credit card. That took 3 minutes. The bank didn't ask for a story. The bank doesn't care about stories. The bank cares about liability. Next, I moved my direct deposit to my personal account. I set it to start immediately. I kept the shared account alive with just enough to cover rent and fix bills for one cycle. That choice wasn't kindness. It was strategy. If rent bounced, Jenna would turn it into a public tragedy. I didn't want to give her an easy headline. I wanted her to have one problem at a time. When the changes were confirmed, I saved the confirmation screens and added them to the folder. Then I took a photo of the paper line I'd written and placed it in the same folder. It was dramatic in the smallest way, and I knew I would want the reminder later. My phone buzzed. Jenna, again. A rapid set of messages, each one shorter than the last, like she was running out of breath. She said I embarrassed her. She said I made Elliot look like the bad guy. She said he was only trying to help. She said I was punishing her for an accident. She said I was cruel. Then, the next message arrived, and it was different. It asked why her card was declining. There it was. Not how she was, not what the doctor said, not whether I was okay. Just a practical shock that her access to my money had stopped. I stared at the screen and felt something close to relief, because that question told me the truth more cleanly than any confession could. She expected my money to be available, even while she was lying and bleeding and accusing me of coldness. She didn't expect consequences. She expected comfort. She expected stability. She expected ownership. I set the phone down without answering. I made coffee. It tasted like burned bitterness, but it gave my hands something to do. I stood by the window and watched people walk their dogs like the world wasn't on fire. A part of me wanted to run to the hospital, not for her, but for closure. Another part of me wanted to never see her face again. But closure is not a real product. It's a story people tell themselves. The only real thing is position, where you stand when the truth becomes public. I opened the messages from that unknown number again, the one that had texted overnight. The tone was still in my head, the controlled politeness, the subtle direction, the assumption that I would follow. I saved that message thread into the timeline folder, too. Then I looked up Elliot Price, not through secret systems, not through anything shady, just through public professional pages, a hospital administrator profile, a board photo, a charity mention, a list of committees, the kind of man who collects titles like armor. His face matched the hospital room, the same polished calm, the same smile that says he's used to people taking his side. He was the kind of guy who knew the language of policies and optics. He wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was managing her, which meant he would manage me next, if I let him. I left the apartment with my laptop closed and my phone charged, and I drove to the hospital again. Not to visit Jenna, to ask a question that would become a marker. At the information desk, I asked for the records office hours and the process for obtaining a basic incident summary as next of kin. I didn't ask for medical details that would cross lines. I asked for what I was legally allowed to request and how to request it. The clerk gave me a pamphlet and a form. She didn't care about my marriage. She cared about identity verification and signatures. I thanked her and walked away. I sat in the cafeteria with the pamphlet, a bad cup of coffee, and my notebook. The cafeteria felt like a neutral country. Doctors, families, staff, all of them moving through personal wars with the same plastic trays. I filled in the form slowly, checking each box twice. Date of incident, relationship to patient, request type. I kept it basic. I didn't need her chart. I needed the administrative truth. Who brought her, who signed, what time she was registered. Those are not feelings. Those are entries. A nurse passing by recognized me from earlier. She glanced at my table, then at the form, then away. She didn't want to get involved. Nobody does. But her eyes lingered a fraction too long in the direction of the corridor, as if she was remembering something she wished she hadn't seen. I didn't chase her. Chasing makes people defensive. Instead, I waited until she returned to the coffee station. I followed at a respectful distance and asked her one simple thing. I asked if the hospital recorded who accompanied a patient during intake. She said yes, in the most careful voice. I asked if that entry was usually corrected if it was wrong. She said yes again. Then she added quietly that intake staff tend to record the truth because it's their job. I thanked her and walked away before she could regret speaking. Back in my car, I wrote down what she said as a neutral witness summary. No name, just the content and time. I wasn't going to drag a nurse into my marriage. I just wanted the principle confirmed. Paperwork is not usually wrong when it is inconvenient. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with another bank alert. A new attempt, this time from a clothing retailer I recognized. Jenna's favorite brand. The amount wasn't enormous, but it was offensive in context. Hospital bed, bruised face, and she was trying to buy herself something to feel in control. I screenshot the alert and added it to the folder. Then, another message from Jenna. She said she couldn't believe I was doing this now. She said she needed me. She said I was heartless. She said Elliot was handling her discharge plan since I wasn't stepping up. That last sentence was the one that finally snapped into place. Handling discharge plans. She wasn't just cheating. She was shifting my role out of my own marriage. She was installing him where I used to be, then acting surprised that I didn't clap for it. I pulled into the garage and sat there with the engine off. The air inside the car smelled like stale winter and coffee. I didn't move for a full minute. Then I opened my notes and typed a new heading. Exposure. Under it, I wrote 3 lines. 1. I do not argue in private. 2. I only move in public records. 3. I let her story collapse itself. I went upstairs, opened my laptop, and began building a 1-page ledger. Dates, places, payments, and her cover story. No commentary, no insults. Just the death by 1,000 truths. Halfway through, my phone rang again. Unknown number. The same one from the night before. I answered this time, not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted another timestamp. The voice was Elliot's, smooth as polished stone. He said we needed to talk like adults. He said Jenna was scared. He said I was making a stressful situation worse. He said he could help us resolve this privately without involving anyone else. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I asked him one question, calmly. I asked why he cared so much about keeping it private. He paused, just a fraction. But it was there. Then he said he was only trying to reduce conflict. He said the hospital did not need drama. He said Jenna needed stability. I thanked him for his concern, then I ended the call. And I saved the call log with the time visible, because his urgency told me something important. Elliot Price was not afraid of me. He was afraid of a paper trail that didn't need his permission. I went back to the ledger and finished the page. Then I printed it, signed the back, and slid it into a clear sleeve like it was evidence, because it was. I stood there in my living room holding 1 page of plain truth, and I realized the accident hadn't just exposed my wife. It had exposed the man she chose to hand the wheel to. And if Elliot was calling me to keep things quiet, it meant the next move would not be hers. It would be his. I slept 2 hours, woke up like I owed someone money, and immediately checked the folder again. Timeline, lock screen, banking, calendar, notes. It looked clean, which meant my mind could breathe. Jenna's first message that morning was not about her head injury. It was about access. She asked why her cards were failing again. She said it was humiliating to be declined in front of staff. She said she needed me to fix it right now. That was the part that finally made me stop feeling sad. Sadness is for people who are still negotiating. I wasn't negotiating. I was documenting. I didn't answer her. I drove back to the hospital, not to sit by her bed, but to collect the kind of truth that doesn't care who cries hardest. Hospitals are built for 2 things, saving bodies and protecting themselves. Everything else is paperwork. Paperwork is my language. At the records window, I asked for the minimum administrative items that a spouse can request. I didn't ask for diagnosis details. I didn't ask for scans. I asked for the admission time, the person listed as the one who brought her, and the responsible party name on the intake face sheet. The clerk slid a clipboard toward me and told me what I already knew. Forms first. Identity check. Waiting. I filled it out with slow hands and a calm face. I handed over my ID. I showed my marriage certificate photo on my phone because I keep it for travel and because irony exists. The clerk scanned everything and asked me to take a seat. I sat where I could see the corridor to the patient rooms. That was not paranoia, that was habit. When people are trying to control a story, they also try to control sightlines. While I waited, I opened my notes app and wrote the time. I wrote who I spoke to, without names. I wrote the exact request I made. I wrote the fact that the hospital accepted it. It was boring, clean, and lethal. 20 minutes later, the clerk called me back. She said the documents would take time and might require Jenna's signature for certain items. She said administrative verification might be available, but anything beyond that needed patient consent. She said it the same way people say no without wanting to fight. I didn't fight. I asked a different question. I asked whether the intake form listed an emergency contact and whether that name could be confirmed as a yes or no item without releasing medical details. The clerk paused, then said that kind of confirmation was usually handled through patient relations. Patient relations. The exact department Elliot claimed as his home. So I thanked her, took the pamphlet, and walked away like a man who just learned the building has a second door. Patient relations was down a hall that smelled like warm plastic and cheap cologne. The waiting room had framed posters about kindness and empathy. It also had a sign about zero tolerance for abuse toward staff, printed in large, bold letters. Hospitals are not subtle about what they expect people to do when they are cornered. I approached the desk and asked for the patient relations supervisor on duty. The receptionist asked why. I said I needed to confirm a responsible party entry that might be incorrect. I kept it calm and procedural. The receptionist nodded and made a call. 5 minutes later, a supervisor came out. Middle-aged, tired eyes, polite tone sharpened by experience. She asked who I was. I explained I was the husband. I explained my wife was admitted overnight. I explained I was requesting administrative confirmation of who was recorded as the person who brought her in because I was being told conflicting information. The supervisor's face did something small. Her eyes tightened. Not sympathy, recognition. This wasn't the first time she'd heard Elliot's name tangled in a mess. Or maybe it was the first time someone had the patience to ask correctly. She said she could not show me documents without proper authorization. She said she could confirm whether a name was listed as emergency contact if that did not reveal medical details. She said she would need to verify my identity again. I handed my ID over again. I let her scan it. I watched her hands, not because I didn't trust her, but because I wanted to know which way the system leaned. She returned my ID and asked me to state the name I believed was on the form. I said Elliot Price. The supervisor's posture stiffened. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it right away either. She asked why I believed that. I told her the hospital itself had told me during the overnight call that Jenna arrived with a man and that his name had been recorded. I told her I had no interest in medical details. I wanted the administrative truth. She nodded once, then stepped away to the back office. I stood there and waited, watching a wall clock tick in a place that pretends time is irrelevant. While I waited, my phone buzzed. Another bank alert. A charge attempt from a rideshare service flagged as suspicious. It didn't go through. The timing was morning, not late night, which meant someone had Jenna's phone in hand, trying to move pieces. Maybe Jenna, maybe Elliot, maybe both. Couples do teamwork in strange ways. I saved the alert and turned my phone face down. I didn't want the receptionist catching my screen and making assumptions. Hospitals are full of assumptions. I didn't need to donate anymore. The supervisor returned 10 minutes later and asked me to step into a side room. Her voice was still polite, but now it carried caution. Inside, she closed the door and spoke in a lower tone. She said she could confirm that Elliot Price was listed in the intake record as the person who accompanied Jenna. She said she could also confirm he was listed as a contact point at admission. She said she could not share more without Jenna's consent. She said if I believed the record was inaccurate or inappropriate, I could file a formal concern through the compliance channel. Compliance. Another word Elliot had tried to wear like a shield. I thanked her. I asked for the compliance channel contact information. She handed me a card with an email address and a case intake phone number. She said all concerns were reviewed. She said she could not guarantee outcomes. That was fine. I wasn't here for guarantees. I was here for the record to exist. I stepped out of patient relations feeling lighter, not because I enjoyed any of this, but because Elliot's story was already cracking. He had walked into Jenna's room with coffee and flowers like a boyfriend. He had talked like an administrator. Now, behind the empathy posters, the hospital confirmed he was on her intake paperwork. Not a misunderstanding, an entry. I walked back toward Jenna's floor without rushing. I didn't intend to see her again today, but I wanted one more thing. Confirmation of whether she had signed any discharge papers yet. If she was being discharged into Elliot's care, that mattered. If she was being discharged into mine, that mattered too. Not emotionally. Legally. At the nurse's station, I asked if Jenna was still under observation. The nurse looked at me, recognized me, and said yes. She asked if I wanted to go in. I said no. I said I only needed to know whether any discharge plans were scheduled. The nurse said discharge was likely tomorrow, depending on symptoms. She said Jenna was asking about leaving earlier. She said patient relations had been by already this morning. Of course they had. I thanked her and walked away. In the elevator, I watched my reflection and realized something unpleasant. Elliot was not just a lover. He was a gatekeeper. He had access to the soft infrastructure of her life right now. Forms, calls, guidance, pressure. He could steer her decisions while she was concussed and panicking, and he could do it with a smile. The question was simple now. If he could steer her, could he steer the narrative about me too? When I got home, I didn't go straight to the laptop. I went to the closet and checked Jenna's side. Her purse was missing, obviously, but other small things were missing too. A makeup bag, a small perfume roller, a pair of earrings she usually wore when she wanted attention. Those weren't hospital needs. Those were presentation needs. She hadn't packed them herself if she left for overtime, which meant someone had come back to get them, or she had planned the night differently from the start. I walked to the kitchen counter and checked the mail. 2 envelopes, 1 catalog, and a thin letter from a credit card company I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened. I opened it. It was a notice about a recent inquiry and a reminder about identity protection services. It wasn't an accusation. It was a corporate courtesy, the kind that arrives right before your life gets expensive. I sat down and read it twice, then placed it on the table like it was a knife. Jenna had always been weirdly protective about her mail. She joked that she loved checking the mailbox first. I'd thought it was a harmless quirk. It wasn't. It was an access point. I logged into my credit monitoring through the standard portal. No tricks, no special pulls, my own account. I checked inquiries. There it was. A soft credit inquiry from a lender I didn't use, dated last week. Another from 2 weeks ago. Another from earlier in the month. Small probes. Someone shopping my identity like it was a product. My pulse did not spike. My pulse slowed. Slow is what happens when the fear is replaced by certainty. I took screenshots of the inquiry list. I saved them in a new folder inside Timeline and named it Credit. Then I did the next lawful move. I froze my credit, all 3 bureaus. It took time and patience and security questions that feel insulting when you're the victim, but by the end, it was locked. I saved every confirmation screen. When it was done, I stared at the wall for a long moment and let the picture become whole. Jenna hadn't just lied about one night. She had been living above my name like it was a roof she could borrow. The affair was the headline. The identity damage was the infrastructure. My phone buzzed again. Jenna again. This time the tone shifted. Less begging, more threat. She said she was going to tell people I abandoned her. She said she was going to tell her mother I was cold and controlling. She said she couldn't believe I cared more about money than her health. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened our shared tablet in the living room, the one we used for recipes and streaming. It was still logged into her email because she liked convenience more than security. I didn't search her inbox like a thief. I didn't need to. A draft sat open on the screen like she had been writing it with shaky hands. A message drafted to her sister. It described me as controlling and financially abusive. It claimed I was punishing her for needing help. It implied I was unstable. It hinted she might need protection. Classic pre-frame. Put the husband on the defensive before the truth arrives. I took a photo of the draft with my phone, making sure the date and the visible draft header were in frame. Then I closed the tablet and set it down gently. Now I had 3 pillars. 1. Hospital administrative confirmation of Elliot being on intake entries. 2. Lock screen proof of a possessive contact label and message. 3. Evidence she was preparing a narrative to paint me as the villain. That last one wasn't just betrayal. That was strategy. I went back to my laptop and opened a fresh document. At the top, I wrote a title in plain text. Statement of facts. I began listing the facts without adjectives. Dates, times, entries, notifications, confirmations, draft, inquiry list, credit freeze. I made it clean enough that a stranger could read it and feel their own stomach tighten. Halfway through, my phone rang again. Not Jenna, not unknown. It was a hospital number. I answered. A nurse said Jenna was asking for me again. She said Jenna was upset and wanted me there. She said Jenna was saying I was freezing her out financially and leaving her vulnerable. The nurse didn't accuse me, but her tone had a question inside it. I told the nurse I would not discuss financial matters with staff. I told her Jenna was safe and medically stable. I told her any discharge planning should be documented correctly and communicated through proper channels. I kept it calm and boring. The nurse paused, then said she understood. Then she added one small detail that mattered. She said patient relations had asked staff earlier whether Jenna had a safe place to go after discharge. Safe place. That meant the story was already being shaped. Jenna and Elliot weren't just trying to get me to visit. They were trying to define me in the system as a risk. I thanked the nurse and ended the call. Then I opened the compliance card I'd been given and stared at the intake email address. Elliot Price had tried to pull me into a private conversation so he could control the tone, so I did the opposite. I began drafting a formal concern to compliance, written like a man who understands systems. No accusations of affairs, no emotional language. Just an administrative conflict of interest concern, with a request that intake documentation and contact listings be reviewed for appropriateness. Then I attached nothing yet. Because the next time I went to the hospital, I wanted Elliot to see the paper trail forming, one page at a time. And I wanted Jenna to realize something simple. The accident didn't make me cruel. It made me organized. I didn't send the compliance email yet. I saved it as a draft and stared at it like it might blink first. If I hit send too early, Elliot would treat it like a warning shot and adjust his story. If I waited too long, Jenna would fill the gap with her own version and stamp it into everyone's minds. So I did what I always do when the room is full of noise. I narrowed the target. I didn't need to prove everything today. I needed one clean line that could not be argued. Something administrative, dated, and ugly enough to force people to stop smiling. Jenna's phone kept lighting up my screen with messages that pretended to be emotional but were really logistical. She didn't ask how I slept. She didn't ask if I was okay. She asked why her card still wasn't working. She asked if I could at least cover her prescriptions. She asked if I was going to ruin her life over one mistake. One mistake, spoken like a person who still thinks the crash was the main event. I didn't answer. I opened the folder and reviewed what I had like a boring prosecutor. Lock screen preview with the EP contact label, bank alerts showing late-night spending, shared calendar block that looked like an alibi placeholder, intake confirmation from patient relations that Elliot was listed as the one who accompanied her. The draft email on the shared tablet painting me as abusive. Each piece alone could be dismissed by a good liar. Together, they made a pattern. A pattern is what systems respond to. A pattern is what policy people fear. I got dressed and went downstairs to check the building mailroom, not because I expected a dramatic letter waiting for me, but because fraud doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It announces itself with paper. In the mail slot, there was another envelope from a lender I didn't recognize. Thin, cheap paper, windows cut into it like a sneer. I carried it upstairs and didn't open it right away. I set it on the table beside yesterday's notice. 2 pieces of the same puzzle. When I finally opened it, the letter inside was polite. It thanked me for my interest. It told me my application was under review and might require additional verification. Application, under review. My name printed cleanly at the top like I'd asked for this. I didn't rage. Rage is for people who still think fairness exists in paperwork. I took a photo of the letter beside today's newspaper app on my phone, date visible on the screen. Then I slid the letter into a clear sleeve. I wrote the time on a sticky note and stuck it to the sleeve. I was building something Jenna couldn't cry her way out of. I called the lender's customer service line. Not to yell, not to accuse. I asked for the process to report identity misuse and request a copy of the application packet. The rep asked security questions. I answered them. The rep said they could flag the application and send me a confirmation email about the dispute. The rep said they could not release the full application without further steps. That was fine. I didn't need their whole packet today. I needed one sentence on record. Before I ended the call, I asked the rep to confirm the date the application was submitted. The rep read it back. Last week, mid-afternoon. Not a time Jenna was at work late. Not a time she was too tired to handle life. A calm hour when she would have been at home, seated, focused, and confident. I ended the call and immediately screenshot the call log showing the time and duration. Then I opened my email and waited for the dispute confirmation to arrive. When it did, I saved it into the folder and printed it. Printing feels old-fashioned until you realize old-fashioned is harder to erase. My phone buzzed again. Jenna. This time she was angrier. The hospital must have told her I'd been asking questions again. She said patient relations was overreacting. She said Elliot had people blowing it out of proportion. She said I was trying to ruin his career because I was jealous. She said I should be ashamed. Jealous. That word always shows up when someone needs you to feel small. I typed a response, then deleted it. A response would turn into a debate would turn into a story about my emotions. I didn't want my emotions in the record, I wanted her actions. Instead, I drove back to the hospital with a folder under my arm. Not a binder, not a dramatic box, just a thin folder that looked like nothing. People underestimate thin folders. They assume thin means weak. At the patient relations desk, the receptionist recognized me and stiffened. I asked to speak to the same supervisor from yesterday. The receptionist asked if this was about a complaint. I said I was requesting a formal intake case number for an administrative concern. I kept my voice soft. The supervisor came out within 10 minutes. She looked more alert today, the way people look when they know a name is about to become a problem. We stepped into the same small side room. I gave her my ID again. I didn't make a joke about it. She offered a seat. I didn't sit. Standing keeps things short. I told her I wanted to file a formal concern about the conflict of interest risk created by a hospital administrator being listed as the accompanying party and contact point for my wife's overnight admission. I said I understood she could not discuss medical details. I said I was only asking for the intake concern to be logged and assigned a case number. She nodded. She asked if I had documentation. I said I had a timeline summary and a screenshot, but I was not submitting anything yet without guidance on what the hospital needed. That was true, and it was also leverage. People take you more seriously when you refuse to overshare. She asked for the dates and times. I gave her the admission date and the approximate intake time from the overnight call. I gave her Elliot's name. I gave her my relationship to the patient and my contact information. Then she asked a question that sounded casual, but wasn't. She asked if I felt unsafe. That was the word again, safe. I looked her in the eyes and told her I felt concerned about narrative manipulation, not physical safety. I told her my wife had started describing me as controlling in messages and drafts, and I wanted the hospital to focus on accurate documentation, not emotional framing. I told her I was calm and cooperative, and I wanted the same from everyone involved. The supervisor's expression softened slightly, like she had been waiting for me to lose control and was disappointed I didn't. She asked if I could provide a copy of any written threats. I didn't call anything a threat. I said I could provide a screenshot showing an administrator contacted me repeatedly from an unknown number urging private resolution. I said I could also provide proof that my wife's devices displayed a possessive contact label consistent with an inappropriate relationship. I kept it procedural. I made it about policy risk, not romance. She took notes. She asked me to wait while she logged the concern. She left the room, and I stood there alone under fluorescent lights that made everyone look guilty. My phone buzzed, but I ignored it. There are moments where ignoring the phone is self-defense. When she returned, she handed me a printed slip with a case number and a short summary line. Intake concern logged. Conflict of interest review requested. Patient relations to follow up. I stared at the paper and felt something shift. Not victory, just the first official crack in Elliot's polished wall. I thanked her, then asked one more question. Whether Elliot Price would be notified directly as part of that process. The supervisor hesitated, then said she couldn't discuss internal routing. Then she added carefully that certain concerns are reviewed by compliance and leadership. Leadership. Good. The higher it climbed, the less Elliot could contain it. I walked out, and the receptionist watched me like I was carrying a bomb. I kind of was. A case number is a bomb you can mail. In the parking garage, I took a photo of the case slip next to my car dashboard clock. Time visible. Date visible. I saved it into the folder and backed it up to my own email. Not shared. Mine. On the drive home, I finally checked my phone. There were 6 missed calls from Jenna and 2 from the unknown number that belonged to Elliot. Jenna had left voicemails. Elliot had not. That difference mattered. Elliot didn't want a recording of his words. He wanted my words. He wanted me to say something he could quote. I didn't give him that. I got home and found another surprise waiting for me. A small overnight bag on the couch, half-zipped. Jenna's. It hadn't been there when I left. The zipper pull was bent slightly, like it had been yanked in a hurry. My first thought was simple. Someone had been in my apartment. The second thought was more precise. Someone wanted me to think Jenna came home. I walked through the apartment slowly, checking what was out of place. Nothing obvious, no broken locks, no missing electronics. But the bedroom closet door was not fully closed. Jenna's jewelry tray was shifted. Then I noticed the smallest thing. The chain lock on the front door was not in its usual position. I never use it, but I always keep it aligned. It was twisted like it had been nudged. I didn't panic. I went to the door and opened it. Then I stepped into the hallway and looked up. My doorbell camera. Not a miracle device pointed at the street. Not a magical surveillance system. Just a simple doorbell camera facing my own doorway, installed months ago because package theft is a hobby in this building. I opened the app and scrolled to the motion events from the last hour. There it was. A visitor. Not Jenna. A man in a dark jacket, baseball cap low, standing too close to the door like he was trying not to be seen by neighbors. He didn't knock like a friend. He waited, then used a key. Used a key. My stomach went cold in a clean line. The man entered, stayed for 6 minutes, then left carrying Jenna's overnight bag. Then, oddly, he returned 3 minutes later and set the bag on my couch before leaving again. Like staging, like intimidation, like someone testing whether I'd notice. I saved a still frame with the timestamp visible. Then I saved another still frame showing his hand near the lock. I didn't zoom in like a detective in a movie. I didn't need to. I needed the fact. Someone entered my home while my wife was in the hospital, and they staged her belongings inside. That wasn't romance. That was pressure. I sat down at my kitchen table and stared at the still frames until my eyes stopped trying to reinterpret them into something less insane. Then I did something that felt both boring and powerful. I printed the still frames and wrote the time underneath each one in black ink. Then I opened the compliance email draft again and attached 2 things: the case number slip and the doorbell still frame. No accusations, no rant. Just a calm request for guidance on how to preserve evidence of improper access and potential intimidation connected to the intake concern. I hovered over the send button. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Elliot. I answered this time, not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted the timing to match the doorbell footage. He spoke softly, like we were old friends. He said I was making a mistake. He said the hospital could consider me unstable if I kept escalating. He said Jenna was scared and saying things. He said we could fix this if I cooperated. He said someone might have tried to help by bringing Jenna's things home. Help, again, that word that covers everything like a blanket. I asked him one question, calm as ice. I asked how he knew about the bag on my couch. Silence. Not long, just long enough to be real. Then he laughed lightly and said Jenna told him, of course. He said she was worried about her things. He said he was only trying to keep her comfortable. I looked at the printed still frame on my table. The man with the cap, the key, the staging. Then I ended the call without saying goodbye. I saved the call log. I wrote the time next to the still frame. And I finally hit send on the compliance email. Because now I had something Elliot couldn't talk his way out of. Someone had used a key to enter my home while my wife was in the hospital. And Elliot Price had just admitted he knew about it before I ever told him. The compliance email didn't bounce back. It didn't trigger fireworks. It just left my outbox and became a problem that belonged to people who wear badges for a living. That silence is always the first response from an institution. They don't react, they absorb. Then they decide what version of reality they can afford. I stood at my kitchen table with printed still frames and a case number slip like I was studying for a test I didn't ask to take. The still frames were clean enough to prove one thing: someone used a key to enter my apartment. The call log was clean enough to prove another thing: Elliot knew about that help before I did. People can argue about intentions forever. They can't argue about timing. Jenna called again. I let it ring. Then she texted. She said she was being discharged tomorrow. She said she needed her things. She said she didn't feel safe with my behavior. She said Elliot had offered to arrange a safe pickup, safe place, safe husband. Every word sounded like it came from a script written by someone who has done this before. I didn't respond. I opened the doorbell app again and watched the clip from the stage bag entry one more time. I didn't do it because I enjoyed it. I did it because repetition removes doubt. Doubt is the enemy. Doubt makes you talk it out. Talk is where liars win. The man in the cap didn't look like a friend. He didn't look like a delivery guy. He moved like someone who had done quiet jobs in quiet hallways. He kept his body angled away from the camera. He used the key without hesitation. He didn't fumble like someone borrowing a spare. So the key existed. Someone had access. The question was, who else had it? I walked to the small tray near the entry where we kept spares. The tray was empty. That alone told me everything. Jenna had taken the spare at some point. Or she had given it away. I laughed once, dry, because of course she did. She'd always called me paranoid for locking up. She'd always rolled her eyes when I checked the deadbolt before bed. Turns out I wasn't paranoid. I was just early. I didn't start a dramatic confrontation. I did the boring move. I called the building office. The leasing agent answered with a chipper tone that sounded like a mask. I told her my unit number. I told her there was unauthorized key use documented by my doorbell camera. I told her I needed the lock changed today. I didn't tell her about affairs. I didn't tell her about hospitals. I kept it simple. Her tone changed immediately. Liability does that to people. She said they could schedule maintenance. She asked if I had filed a police report. I told her I wasn't discussing that and I only needed the lock updated due to compromised access. She said the property manager would need to approve after-hours work. I told her I could bring the doorbell still framed to the office if she needed documentation. She said to come down. I put the printed still frames into a folder and walked to the leasing office like I was delivering homework. The lobby felt different now. Every neighbor glance felt like a potential witness. Every smile felt like information I hadn't earned. In the office, the leasing agent took the folder and looked at the still frames. Her eyebrows lifted. She tried to look neutral and failed. She asked if the person was my wife. I said no. I said the person used a key and staged property inside the unit. Her mouth tightened again. She went to the back and returned with the property manager. He was mid-40s, too tan, trying to look like he didn't want drama. Drama is the only thing property managers ever get. He asked what happened. I told him exactly what I had, and nothing I didn't. I said my spouse is hospitalized. I said I have recorded proof of an unknown man using a key to enter my unit and manipulate property. I said I have reason to believe a spare key is compromised. I said I need the locks changed and the access history reviewed. He said they don't have access history like a spy movie. I nodded. I said I didn't need a spy movie. I needed a service log entry that the lock was changed today because of compromised access. That sentence landed. Managers understand paper trails. Paper trails are how they survive tenant accusations later. He agreed. He said maintenance could do it within 2 hours. He said I would need to present ID at the unit when they arrived. I said fine. Then I asked one more question, calmly. I asked whether any staff had entered my unit in the last 48 hours for maintenance. He said no. He said there were no work orders. He said if anyone entered, it was not staff. He said if my spouse had a key, that wasn't their issue. I nodded again. I thanked him. I asked him to email me confirmation of the lock change order and the reason, compromised spare key and unauthorized entry footage reviewed by management. He hesitated, then agreed because he had already looked at the still frames and realized this wasn't a tenant having a bad day. This was a tenant building a file. I left with a scheduled lock change and a small sense of control returning to my bones. Back upstairs, I didn't sit. I walked the apartment and looked for anything else that felt staged. The overnight bag was still on the couch like a dare. I didn't open it. If there was something inside meant to provoke me, I wasn't going to play. My phone buzzed. An email from compliance already. Subject line, acknowledgement of concern. Short message. They confirmed receipt. They listed the case number I'd already been given. They said they would review and follow up. They asked me not to contact staff involved directly during the review. I read that last line twice. Not contact staff involved directly. So Elliot had already been labeled staff involved, not concerned bystander. That was subtle, but it mattered. I saved the email as a PDF, printed it, and slid it into the folder behind the doorbell still frames. Then Jenna called again, and this time I answered, because I wanted her to hear the new tone in my voice. Not anger, not pleading, just finished. She started with a sob. She said she was scared. She said Elliot told her I was spiraling. She said the nurses were looking at her weird because her card kept declining. She said I was humiliating her. She asked why I couldn't just be kind for one day. I told her I had filed a formal concern about Elliot being on her intake. She stopped crying like someone hit pause. She asked what I did. I told her I asked for a compliance review because I needed accurate records. She said I was trying to destroy him. She said he did nothing wrong. She said he was only there because she asked him to help. She said he was the only person she could rely on when I abandoned her. I asked her why she had his number saved as a heart emoji with his initials. She didn't answer. She didn't deny it either. She pivoted into accusation the way a fish pivots away from a hook. She said I was controlling. She said I tracked her spending. She said I was obsessed. She said I was making a public mess. She said she was going to tell everyone what I was really like. I told her she could tell any story she wanted. I told her paper would still exist. I told her the hospital already had a case number. I told her my credit bureaus were frozen because of applications in my name. I told her I was not debating anymore. She went quiet. Then she said she never opened anything in my name. She said I was insane. She said Elliot warned her I would accuse her of fraud. She said this was exactly why she didn't feel safe. There it was. The word again. Safe. I said one sentence, flat and simple. I said someone used a key to enter our apartment yesterday. She inhaled sharply. Then she said she didn't know anything about that. She said she was in a hospital bed. She said I was making it up. I told her I had doorbell footage. I told her the man staged her overnight bag in the apartment. I told her Elliot called me and mentioned the bag before I told anyone it existed. She went silent long enough that my sarcasm actually gave up. Silence is where guilt lives when it can't find a lie fast enough. Then she said Elliot had only been trying to help because she needed her things and I wasn't bringing them. She said someone from his security team offered to drop them off. She said it wasn't a big deal. She said I was twisting everything. Security team for an administrator. Sure. I told her to stop. I told her that entering my home with a key and staging property was not help. I told her it was intimidation. I told her I wasn't going to discuss it on the phone. She started crying again, louder, like volume could change what she'd just admitted. She said I was cruel. She said I was punishing her for being hurt. She said she didn't even know if she would walk normally again. She said I was a monster. I almost laughed. Not because injury is funny, because she could still perform tragedy while casually admitting she authorized someone to enter my home with a key. I ended the call without saying goodbye. 10 minutes later, there was a knock. Maintenance. 2 guys, 1 clipboard, 1 tool bag, no interest in my personal disaster. I showed ID. They changed the lock. They gave me new keys and a short form to sign. I signed it. They left. One of them asked if everything was okay. I said yes, because that's what men say when everything is not okay. I took a photo of the work order beside my kitchen clock. I saved it, I printed it, I added it to the folder, then I sat down and finally opened the overnight bag. Inside were clothes Jenna didn't wear for work, a dress she liked because it made people look at her, a small bottle of perfume, a pair of heels that had never touched a hospital floor, a lipstick that was too bold for overtime. It wasn't a hospital bag, it was a date bag. She hadn't packed for a shift, she had packed for attention. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything. I took photos. I laid items out on the table and photographed them like inventory. Boring, clean, unarguable. My phone buzzed again. Another email. This one was from the property manager, confirming the lock change order and referencing unauthorized entry footage reviewed. He wrote it in careful language, like he wanted to avoid any responsibility, but he put it in writing anyway. That was all I needed. I saved it, printed it, added it. Then another message hit my phone. Not Jenna, a hospital number. I answered, expecting another nurse pushing pity. Instead, a calm voice introduced herself as a hospital social worker. She said she was calling to discuss discharge planning and safety concerns. She said Jenna had expressed fear about returning home. She asked if I could confirm whether the home environment was safe. I held the phone away from my ear for half a second and stared at the date bag on my table. Then I brought it back and spoke in my calmest tone. I told her my home was safe. I told her my spouse authorized an unknown man to enter my unit with a key while she was hospitalized. I told her I had documented footage and building management confirmation of unauthorized entry. I told her I had changed the locks today because access was compromised. I told her there was an active compliance case because Jenna's lover is a hospital administrator listed on her intake. The social worker went quiet. You could hear her brain shifting gears. She asked if I had threatened Jenna. I said no. She asked if there had ever been violence. I said no. She asked if I could provide documentation. I told her I would only provide documentation through the hospital's formal channels, not over the phone. She said she understood. Then she said something that made my blood run cold in a clean, professional way. She said Jenna had requested that staff note in her file that I was financially controlling and might retaliate if she left. There it was. The pre-frame, now stamped in a hospital record. I told the social worker I wanted to speak with her supervisor and the compliance office together before discharge. I told her I wanted my statement entered into the record as well, including the lock change order, the unauthorized entry footage, and the confirmed intake listing of Elliot Price. She said she would arrange a meeting. She said it could happen tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. A scheduled room, witnesses, policy language, case numbers, the exact environment Elliot liked to dominate. I ended the call and sat there staring at my folder because I realized the next phase was not about proving Jenna lied. It was about proving I was sane. I added one final page to the folder, handwritten, date, and time at the top. It listed 3 facts. Unauthorized entry documented. Locks changed with management confirmation. Hospital compliance case active. Then I set the folder by the door like a weapon that never needed to be raised. My phone buzzed again. A new message from Jenna. Just 5 words. She said Elliot will be there. And for the first time since the accident, I felt something close to a smile form. Because if Elliot showed up in a formal discharge meeting with a compliance case already open, he wasn't walking into a private mess. He was walking into a room where every word could become an official entry. And I was bringing paper. I didn't sleep much, not because I was afraid of Jenna's tears. Tears are weather. I didn't sleep because I kept hearing that sentence in my head like a metronome. Elliot will be there. The kind of line that's supposed to make you behave. The kind of line that's supposed to make you show up smaller. By sunrise, my folder looked like it had gained weight overnight. Printed emails, the lock change work order, the property manager's confirmation, the doorbell still frames, the bank alerts, the credit inquiry screenshots, the compliance acknowledgement, the photos of the bag contents laid out like inventory. Yeah, it wasn't art. It was insulation. Cold, legal insulation. I shaved anyway. Not for her. For the room. A man who looks unwell gives liars a free canvas. On my way out, I stood at the door and checked the deadbolt twice. Old habit. New meaning. Then I picked up the folder and held it flat against my chest like it might keep my ribs from cracking in public. The hospital lobby was already busy, full of people pretending they weren't terrified. I went straight to the patient relations desk. The same receptionist, same polite, tight smile. She recognized me and offered the kind of kindness you give to someone you expect to explode. I told her I was here for the discharge planning meeting and compliance follow-up. I said I was invited by the social worker. I said I had documentation I intended to submit through formal channels. I kept my voice level. She made a call. She asked me to wait. I waited. That's the funny part. I can be patient. Jenna never learned that about me. She thought patience was weakness. She thought silence meant surrender. She built her entire personality around how quickly she could tilt a room. 2 minutes later, the social worker appeared. She looked like someone who has spent years walking between lies and trauma without letting either one stain her. She introduced herself again and asked me to follow her. We walked down a hall and into a small conference room with fluorescent lighting and chairs arranged like a negotiation. There was a tissue box in the middle of the table, the hospital's silent confession that this room was where people collapse. The social worker sat on one side. A nurse case manager joined her. Then a compliance representative walked in, holding a laptop. Not a suit. Not a court vibe. Just a person whose job is to make sure nothing becomes a lawsuit. The chair across from me stayed empty for a full minute. Then the door opened and Jenna rolled in on a wheelchair with an IV pole because the hospital loves theater as much as anyone. She looked pale, bruising blooming near her temple. Her eyes were sharp anyway. Pain doesn't soften someone who enjoys control. Behind her, pushing the chair, was Elliot Price. He wore a calm smile like a badge. Clean shirt, no tie, hospital ID clipped in a perfect spot, like he wanted everyone to see he belonged here. His eyes landed on me and held for half a second too long, a quiet challenge wrapped in politeness. Jenna looked at me like she expected guilt to make me fold. Elliot looked at me like he expected anger to make me fail. Both of them were wrong. I wasn't here to win an argument. I was here to enter a record. The social worker cleared her throat and started with introductions. She asked everyone to state their role. Jenna said she was the patient. Elliot said he was a hospital administrator and a friend supporting her. He didn't say fiancé. He didn't say lover. He didn't say why his name was on the intake. I almost admired the audacity. Almost. The compliance rep glanced at her screen and said there was an active concern logged involving a potential conflict of interest and documentation integrity. She said this meeting would focus on discharge planning and safety assessment, and any compliance issues would be routed through proper review. Jenna's eyes flicked to Elliot. Elliot nodded slightly, like he was managing a client, not comforting a woman he'd been in a car with. The social worker asked Jenna to explain her discharge plan and her concerns. Jenna went first, of course. She spoke slowly, like she was fragile. She said she didn't feel safe returning home. She said I had become financially controlling and unpredictable. She said I was punishing her while she was injured. She said she feared I would retaliate if she left. She said she needed a safe transition to her sister's place. She didn't mention the lover. She didn't mention the bar. She didn't mention the overnight bag. She didn't mention the unknown man entering my apartment with a key. She didn't mention the fact that she had packed a date outfit, not scrubs. She just painted me in broad strokes, like a villain from a bad story. The kind of story people believe because it's easier than details. The nurse case manager asked if there had been any physical violence. Jenna hesitated, just long enough to imply something without committing. Then she said no, but she feared it could happen because I was spiraling. Elliot added a gentle comment about stress and emotions and how he had seen me agitated during the initial intake. He said he wanted to ensure Jenna had a safe plan. Safe. Again. The word they were trying to stamp into the hospital's memory. The compliance rep looked at me and asked for my response. I didn't start with feelings. I didn't defend my character. I didn't call Jenna a liar, even though she was performing the role like she'd rehearsed it. I opened my folder and slid one page onto the table, face down, like I was offering a card in a game nobody else realized they were playing. I said I wanted my statement entered into the record for discharge planning and safety assessment. I said I would keep it factual. I said I would not discuss medical details. I said I would discuss access, documentation, and specific incidents. The room quieted. People get very serious when you say the word record. I flipped the page over and pointed to the top. It was the property manager's email confirming the lock change due to unauthorized entry footage reviewed. I said my spouse was hospitalized and not at home. I said an unknown man used a key to enter my apartment and staged property inside. I said my doorbell camera recorded it. I said building management reviewed it and changed the locks the same day. I said this information matters because it shows access to my home was compromised, and the attempt to frame me as a threat does not match the documented reality. The social worker's posture changed. She leaned in slightly, like she was switching from empathy mode into risk mode. Jenna's face went stiff. Elliot's smile didn't move, but his eyes sharpened. The nurse asked if I believed Jenna arranged that entry. I said I did not know who arranged it. I said I knew the entry happened, it was unauthorized by me, and it involved a key. I said that alone warranted a safety concern, but not the kind they were suggesting. The compliance rep asked if I had footage. I slid the doorbell still frames out of the folder. I didn't push them like a salesman. I placed them calmly on the table, time and date visible, the man's cap, the hand near the lock, the 6-minute window, the return trip with the bag, the staging. The social worker looked at the still frames and went quiet. The nurse case manager looked uncomfortable. The compliance rep took a photo of the still frames with her phone, then paused and asked if I could email them to the case file address. I said yes. I said I would send them immediately after the meeting. Jenna's eyes filled with tears. Not the soft kind, the angry kind. She said it was ridiculous. She said she was in a hospital bed. She said I was trying to make her look crazy. She said I was paranoid. I didn't respond to the emotion. I responded to the process. I slid out the lock change work order and the photo of the work order beside my dashboard clock. I said this was completed after the unauthorized entry. I said no one was locked out. I said Jenna could retrieve her essential belongings through a coordinated pickup, but I would not allow unknown third parties to enter my unit again. Elliot spoke then, still calm, still measured. He said Jenna had asked for her bag and he had arranged help because I was refusing to bring her things. He said he saw no issue with that. He said the man was likely a building runner or courier. I looked at him and finally allowed myself a small, controlled sarcasm, the kind that doesn't raise your voice. I said it was interesting he knew about the bag before I did. Elliot blinked once. Jenna's head snapped toward him. The compliance rep asked what I meant. I pulled up my call log screenshot, printed, time visible. I said Elliot called me and mentioned the bag on my couch before I told anyone it was there. I said I had not discussed the bag with Jenna before that call. I said the timing suggests Elliot had awareness of the entry and staging as it happened. Elliot tried to pivot. He said Jenna told him she needed her things. He said he assumed someone would drop them off. He said he didn't know the details. I didn't argue. I slid out one more page. The compliance acknowledgement email, printed, with the case number. I said there was an active compliance review because Elliot was listed as the accompanying party and contact point on Jenna's intake. I said patient relations confirmed it. I said I requested the review because an administrator being in that position creates conflict and risk. The room froze in a different way. Not emotional, institutional. The kind of freeze that happens when people realize a name is on the wrong form. The compliance rep's eyes flicked to Elliot's badge, then back to her laptop. Jenna tried to speak over it. She said Elliot was there as a friend. She said she panicked. She said she didn't want to call me because I was judgmental. She said she didn't do anything wrong by accepting help. I let her run out of air, then I placed the last set of photos on the table. The contents of the overnight bag, dress, heels, perfume, bold lipstick. I said Jenna had told me she was working late the night of the accident. I said this bag did not match a late shift. I said it matched a date. I said I was not here to shame her. I said I was here to correct the record because her claim that I was retaliating is not consistent with the evidence. The nurse case manager stared at the photos like she wished she had chosen a different career. The social worker asked Jenna directly if she had lied about where she was going. Jenna's eyes flashed. She tried to say she didn't remember. She tried to say the accident messed with her memory. She tried to say I was exploiting her injury. Then the compliance rep asked Elliot whether he had been in the vehicle with her at the time of the accident. Elliot's jaw tightened. He said he could not discuss personal matters. He said it was inappropriate in a discharge meeting. The compliance rep replied calmly that conflict of interest concerns require clarity about the relationship and involvement. She said refusing to answer would be noted. Noted. The word that makes liars sweat. Jenna looked at Elliot like she was begging him to save her. Elliot looked at the compliance rep like he was calculating. Then Elliot tried a different angle. He said he was concerned about my financial control and that Jenna needed support. He suggested the hospital help her access funds for recovery. I almost laughed again. He couldn't help himself. He kept circling money because he thought money was the only lever. I slid my final page forward. My credit inquiry list screenshots and the dispute confirmation email from the lender. I said there were fraudulent applications in my name. I said I froze my credit to prevent further damage. I said I was cooperating with standard identity theft dispute processes. I said Jenna had access to my mail and shared devices. I said I was not accusing anyone in this room, but I wanted this fact included because financial manipulation claims were being raised against me while my identity was under active threat. Jenna's face went white under the bruises. The social worker asked Jenna if she had opened accounts in my name. Jenna said no too quickly. Then she said she didn't know. Then she said she had only looked at options because she was stressed. Then she said Elliot had advised her about resources and credit building. Elliot's eyes snapped toward her, sharp and warning. Too late. The crack was open. The compliance rep typed something into her laptop and said she would be escalating this review immediately. She said Elliot should not be involved in Jenna's discharge planning going forward due to the active conflict concern. She said a different administrator would be assigned. Elliot's calm smile finally faltered. Just a millimeter. But it was the first real sign he was losing control of the room. Jenna started crying again, but this time it sounded different. Less performance, more fear. The social worker said discharge would be delayed until a safe plan was confirmed and documentation was corrected. She said Jenna could go to her sister's home if appropriate, but the hospital would document that the home concern was not based on violence, and that unauthorized third-party entry had occurred at my residence. Then the nurse case manager asked one final question, like she was trying to end the meeting with something simple. She asked Jenna who the man in the doorbell still frames was. Jenna looked at the still frames, then at Elliot. Elliot said nothing, and that silence told me everything about who had been holding her leash. The compliance rep stood and said the meeting was over. She said she would follow up by end of day. She said Elliot should return to his duties and refrain from contact with me. Elliot's eyes met mine one last time as he turned the wheelchair. He didn't look smug anymore. He looked annoyed, like I had messed up his schedule. Jenna looked back at me as they rolled out. Her face had the same question it always had when she hit consequences. How dare you? I didn't answer it. I just gathered my papers, put them back in the folder, and stood up slowly. Because now the hospital had something Jenna couldn't delete. And Elliot had something he couldn't charm. A record. And as I walked out of that room, my phone buzzed with a new email from compliance. Subject line: immediate review meeting scheduled. And for the first time, I understood exactly what was coming next. They weren't going to ask Elliot to explain himself. They were going to ask him to resign. The email from compliance hit my inbox before I reached the elevator. It was almost insulting how fast systems move when the risk has a name tag. Immediate review meeting scheduled. No emojis, no soft language. Just a time window and a conference room number. The kind of message that makes people like Elliot stop smiling in hallways. I didn't celebrate. I just walked to my car and sat there with the folder on the passenger seat like it was a second person. My hands didn't shake. That's the weird part. When you finally stop hoping someone will do the right thing, your body calms down. Hope is exhausting. I drove home and didn't play music. The city sounded sharper without it. Tires on wet pavement, a siren far away, people living their normal lives while mine turned into a spreadsheet of lies. When I got upstairs, the apartment felt too quiet. The new lock clicked clean. The deadbolt was solid. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. Then my phone buzzed. Jenna. She didn't call. She sent a long text, and I could tell it was written with someone standing over her shoulder. The sentences had that careful balance of victim and accusation. She said the meeting was humiliating. She said I had weaponized paperwork. She said I had made staff treat her like a criminal. She said she was scared of what I might do next. Then she wrote the line that mattered. She said Elliot would never forgive me, not the hospital, not the process. Elliot. I stared at that sentence and felt my last soft spot turn hard. She wasn't talking like a wife. She was talking like an employee who had messed up her manager's schedule. I didn't respond. I took the doorbell still frames and printed one extra copy. Not because I needed it, because I wanted the next person who tried to step into my apartment to understand that my home had become a document. The next call came from an unknown number. I answered with the calm voice I kept for vendors and angry tenants, a voice that says, "You can try." Elliot didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. He spoke like someone who believes he is entitled to your attention. He said we needed to talk like adults. He said I was making a bad situation worse. He said Jenna was injured and vulnerable. He said I was punishing her financially and emotionally. I listened without interrupting because people reveal their priorities when you let them talk. He didn't mention her pain once in a real way. He mentioned optics. He mentioned risk. He mentioned what the hospital could do if they decided I was harassing staff. He mentioned how quickly narratives form. Then he offered the deal. He said if I withdrew my complaint and stopped contacting hospital departments, he would ensure Jenna got her belongings, a safe discharge plan, and support for her recovery. He said we could keep it quiet. Keep it quiet. That phrase wasn't about kindness. It was about control. I asked him one question. One date only, like a knife. I asked why his number was in Jenna's phone as EP with a heart. He didn't answer directly. He said Jenna was confused and needed help. He said she had been emotional for weeks. He said she had complained about me being distant. He said he had only tried to guide her. Guide, help, support. Words that sound nice until you see a man using a key on your doorbell camera. I asked another question. I asked who the man in the cap was. Elliot sighed, like I was exhausting him. He said he had no idea who entered my apartment. He said maybe Jenna's sister had arranged something. He said maybe the building staff did it. He said I was paranoid again. I told him the building staff confirmed no entry. I told him the locks were changed. I told him his call log timing was already documented. Then I ended the call. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult him. I didn't need to. People like Elliot expect anger. They prepare for anger. They don't prepare for quiet refusal. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a new email. Not from compliance. From a hospital address I didn't recognize. The sender name was neutral, like a brand trying to avoid liability. The message said, politely, that any further communication should go through the assigned compliance representative. It attached a short form, a request for records correction. So the system had already put up walls. Good. I filled the form out with 2 sentences and attached the doorbell still frames, the lock change order, and the property manager confirmation. I sent it back. I printed the sent email. Then I waited. Waiting is usually where guilt creeps in. Mine didn't. Instead, something else arrived. A notification from my bank app. A small alert. Attempted charge declined. The merchant name wasn't a pharmacy. It wasn't a clinic cafeteria. It was a boutique hotel restaurant. I stared at it for a long moment, because it wasn't just a charge. It was a habit. A reflex. Jenna reaching for my money like reaching for a light switch. I screenshot the alert and saved it. Then my building group chat lit up. I almost never opened it. It's usually lost packages and passive-aggressive elevator complaints. But the preview line caught my eye. Someone posted, "Is everything okay with Unit 14C? My name wasn't there, but it didn't need to be. Gossip doesn't need details. It just needs a target." Another message popped in. A neighbor said she saw someone trying the door in the hallway yesterday, someone in a cap. She said she thought it was Jenna's cousin. She said she didn't want to get involved, but it felt weird. Neutral witness line. Unnamed, unpolished, real. I replied with one sentence. I asked her to message me privately with the time she saw it and any detail she remembered. No drama, no story, just a request. She did. She sent a short note. She said it was around noon. She said the man looked annoyed. She said he kept his face down. She said she heard a soft click like a key, not a knock. I wrote her name and her sentence summary on paper, dated it, and signed it. I didn't ask her to go on record. I didn't need to yet. I just needed the reality written down. Then I heard a knock at my door. I didn't move right away. I checked the doorbell app. 2 people stood in my hallway. Jenna's sister, Maya, and a hospital transport aide. Maya looked tense, arms crossed, ready to argue. The aide looked bored, ready to leave. Maya held a bag of hospital discharge papers and a small clear plastic bag that looked like personal items. I opened the door with the chain on. Not because I was scared of her, because boundaries look better than explanations. Maya started talking immediately. She said Jenna had asked her to pick up clothes and documents. She said the hospital wanted proof of a safe plan. She said I was being cruel. She said Jenna was injured, and I was obsessed with catching her. I didn't argue with Maya either. Family members like Maya don't want truth. They want a role. They want someone to blame so they can feel useful. I told Maya the locks were changed and no one else had access anymore. I told her she could pick up a small set of essential items Jenna needed, and I would pack them myself while she waited in the hallway. I told her she would not enter my apartment. I told her there would be no unknown couriers, no helpers, no Elliot. Maya rolled her eyes and said I was controlling. Then she said the quiet part without realizing it. She said Jenna had already told everyone I was controlling, so I should stop pretending. There it was, the pre-frame, now spreading outside the hospital. I nodded like I'd heard it before, because I had. I told her I wasn't pretending. I told her I was documenting. Maya laughed sharply and said I needed therapy. Then she lowered her voice and said Jenna had made mistakes, but I didn't need to ruin her. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. I told Maya I wasn't ruining Jenna. I told her Jenna ruined her own story when she let strangers into my home and tried to label me unsafe in a hospital file. I told her I had submitted documentation and the hospital had an active review. I told her if she wanted to protect Jenna, she should stop letting Elliot stand behind her like a shield. Maya flinched at his name. That was new. That was useful. I said I would bring out clothing and her ID, nothing else. I told the transport aide it would take 5 minutes. I closed the door and packed a simple bag. Loose sweatpants, a hoodie, flats, toiletries, no jewelry, no fancy perfume, no date dress, nothing that could be turned into a story. When I opened the door again, Maya looked past me into the apartment like she was hunting for evidence of my cruelty. She didn't find any. Clean counters, no broken frames, no smashed phones, just a man who had stopped playing. I handed her the bag and asked her to confirm something. I asked if Jenna had told her about the man entering my apartment with a key. Maya's expression shifted, just slightly. She said no. She said Jenna never mentioned that. She said, why would she? I told Maya it happened. I told her I had footage. I told her the building changed the locks. I told her the hospital had been informed. Then I watched Maya do something I didn't expect. She didn't get angry. She got quiet. She looked down at the bag in her hands like it weighed more than clothes. Then she said something small that landed like a brick. She said Jenna told her Elliot had people who could handle things. People. Like Jenna's life was a company. Maya looked at me and asked for the first time, not as an attacker, but as a sister trying to understand. She asked if Jenna and Elliot were actually together. I didn't answer with emotion. I answered with a fact. I told her Jenna lied to spend the night with him. I told her they crashed. I told her she woke up in a hospital bed asking why I wouldn't visit. I told her she chose him before she chose truth. I told her I was done being her cover story. Maya swallowed hard and nodded once. Then she turned the wheelchair aide and started walking away. But before she reached the elevator, Maya looked back over her shoulder and said one last thing. She said compliance had called Jenna's sister's house already. She said they wanted Elliot's involvement clarified in writing. She said the hospital didn't like surprises. Then she left, and my hallway went quiet again. I shut the door and leaned my forehead against it for a second, not from sadness, but from concentration. Things were moving now. The story was escaping Jenna's mouth and entering rooms where lies have consequences. My phone buzzed with another email. This one was from compliance. Short, sharp, no warm language. They requested I attend a formal meeting with the compliance lead, patient relations, and a hospital administrator not connected to the case. They asked me to bring any documentation relevant to unauthorized access attempts and financial coercion claims. Financial coercion claims. So Elliot had tried to pivot into money again. Of course he did. If he couldn't win on romance, he'd try to win on victimhood. I replied that I would attend. I attached the bank decline alert and the neighbor witness note scanned. I kept it clinical. Then I placed the folder back on my table and stared at it like it was a doorway to the next phase. Because tomorrow wasn't going to be another quiet meeting. Tomorrow was when Elliot would either answer on record or run. And I had a feeling he'd try to run in the loudest possible way. The compliance meeting wasn't in some dramatic courtroom. It was in a windowless conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner, the natural perfume of consequences. I showed up 10 minutes early on purpose. If you arrive late, you look guilty. If you arrive early, you look prepared. Prepared scares people who live on charm. I wore the same plain jacket I wear when tenants try to argue about fees they never paid. Nothing flashy, nothing angry husband. Just a man with a folder who learned the hard way that calm is a weapon. A compliance lead walked in first. Her badge said her name, but her eyes said her job. Remove risk, reduce noise, keep the hospital alive. Patient relations followed behind her, and a different administrator I'd never seen came in last, carrying a tablet like it was a shield. The compliance lead asked me to confirm my name and relationship. Then she asked the question everyone pretends is casual. She asked why I believed this was more than a personal conflict. I didn't offer a speech. I slid the folder across the table. I said it became institutional the moment a hospital administrator was placed on my wife's intake as her accompanying party, then tried to influence discharge planning, then contacted me directly while an active concern was logged. I said it became a safety matter when an unknown man used a key to enter my apartment and stage property. I said it became a documentation issue when I was labeled unsafe without verified facts. The room stayed quiet. Quiet is what happens when people realize you're not here to vent. You're here to submit. The administrator with the tablet asked me to walk them through the unauthorized entry again, in simple terms. I did. Time, date, doorbell clip, lock changed, property manager email, neighbor note. No mystery story, no assumptions. Just a chain of boring, undeniable steps. Then the compliance lead shifted to the second topic. She said Jenna had claimed financial control and retaliation. She said the hospital needed to understand whether those claims had merit for safety planning. She said they needed to know if Jenna would be discharged into financial harm. It was almost funny how quickly Elliot's fingerprints showed up even when he wasn't in the room. He couldn't win on romance, so he tried to win on fear. He couldn't undo the doorbell footage, so he tried to rewrite my motive. I opened my bank screenshots and slid one page forward. Attempted boutique hotel restaurant charge declined. I said the account was mine. I said the authorized user status had been removed. I said the charge attempt happened after Jenna was already in the hospital and after she had been told her card no longer worked. I said this wasn't retaliation. It was boundary enforcement after documented deception. The patient relations rep frowned at the merchant name. The compliance lead wrote something down. The tablet administrator looked like he was calculating what this would look like if it reached legal. Then the compliance lead asked a question that made the air change. She asked whether I believed Jenna had misused my identity financially. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said I had active dispute confirmations from a lender and an inquiry list showing applications I did not initiate. I said my credit bureaus were frozen. I said I had multiple envelopes arriving with my name and unfamiliar lenders. I said I was following standard dispute procedure, not launching accusations. That phrase mattered. Standard procedure. It's the adult version of I'm not being dramatic. She asked if I could provide the inquiry list. I did. Clean screenshots, dates, names, nothing fancy. Just enough to show this wasn't one weird letter. It was a pattern. The compliance lead nodded once and said they would document that Jenna's claim of financial control existed alongside evidence of attempted unauthorized charges and disputed applications. She said that meant the hospital would not treat my boundary actions as automatic abuse indicators without corroboration. In other words, Jenna's script didn't get stamped as truth. Then the door opened. Elliot walked in like he owned the room. No coat, no nerves. That same calm smile, that same posture of a man who thinks rules only apply to other people. He nodded at the compliance lead like they were colleagues, not investigators. Behind him came Jenna's sister, Maya, pushing Jenna in a wheelchair again. Jenna looked worse today, not physically, but emotionally. Her eyes were red, her jaw tight, her shoulders lifted like she was bracing for impact. Elliot sat beside her without asking. He placed one hand on the back of her chair like a claim. The compliance lead didn't greet him warmly. She didn't greet him at all. She just looked at him and said, in a flat voice, that he was not invited as a support person due to the active conflict concern. Elliot smiled anyway and said he was here because Jenna requested him. He said it was her right. The compliance lead said it was not her right to place him into a compliance review involving him. She said his presence risked contaminating the process. She said he could wait outside. Elliot's smile tightened. He glanced at Jenna, and Jenna immediately started talking, like she'd been coached to fill silence before it could crush her. She said she felt unsafe. She said I was punishing her. She said I had humiliated her in meetings. She said I was obsessed with proving she lied. She said Elliot was her advocate and she needed him. The compliance lead listened without blinking. Then she asked Jenna one question. She asked whether Jenna had authorized anyone to enter my apartment with a key while she was hospitalized. Jenna hesitated. Elliot's eyes moved a fraction, a warning. Jenna said no. Then she corrected herself and said she had only asked for her belongings. Then she said she never told anyone to use a key. Then she said she didn't know how the bag ended up there. Too many versions, too fast. The compliance lead looked at Elliot and asked if he had arranged anyone to access my unit. Elliot said no. He said he had no idea who entered. He said maybe it was a misunderstanding. He said I was escalating a harmless act of help. He said this was what I did. Turn normal events into threats. Then the tablet administrator did something that made Elliot's posture change. He asked Elliot calmly to confirm whether he had contacted me directly after the initial intake. Elliot said yes. He said he had only reached out as a concerned friend to reduce conflict and protect a patient. He said he had done it out of compassion. Compassion. Another blanket word, another cover. The compliance lead asked Elliot why his number was in Jenna's phone as a heart-labeled contact. Jenna made a small, choking sound like she hadn't expected that detail to be brought up again. Elliot's smile finally slipped for a second. He said it was irrelevant. He said personal labels were not evidence. He said the hospital should focus on Jenna's recovery, not my obsession. The compliance lead nodded like she'd heard that line 1,000 times. Then she turned her laptop screen slightly, not toward me, but toward Elliot. She said quietly that the hospital's access logs showed Elliot had opened Jenna's electronic chart multiple times after his shift, and after he had been instructed to stay out of her record during the review. Elliot's face went still. That was the first time I saw him genuinely lose control of his expression. Not rage, not fear. The quick, blank recalculation of a man realizing the floor has vanished. Jenna looked at him. Maya looked at him. Even Jenna's sister, who had come ready to fight me, looked at Elliot like she was seeing him without the lighting filter. Elliot tried to recover. He said he accessed the record to ensure continuity. He said he was worried about discharge errors. He said he had only read, not changed anything. The tablet administrator asked if he understood that even reading without a care roll is a compliance violation. Elliot tried to laugh it off. It didn't land. The compliance lead asked Jenna if Elliot had advised her on what to say about safety and financial control. Jenna opened her mouth, then shut it. That silence was louder than any confession. Then the compliance lead dropped the sentence that cracked the whole room. She said the hospital would be placing Elliot on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Jenna made a sound like someone had taken her oxygen. Elliot sat back in his chair, still trying to look relaxed, but his hand tightened on the chair arm. Maya's eyes went wide, then darted to Jenna like she suddenly understood what Jenna had tied herself to. Elliot spoke, controlled but sharp. He said this was an overreaction. He said there was no harm. He said the husband was manipulating the process. He said Jenna was the victim here. The compliance lead didn't argue. She didn't debate. She simply said the decision was procedural and would be documented. She said he would be contacted by HR and legal. She said he was not to contact me again. Elliot turned to me then, finally dropping the polite mask. He said, in a low voice, that I was making a mistake. He said I didn't understand what kind of people I was provoking. He said I should think about my building, my job, my reputation. He said accidents happen. The room went quiet in a different way. Even Jenna looked shocked, like she hadn't expected him to show his teeth in front of her. The compliance lead snapped her head up and asked Elliot to repeat what he said. Elliot smiled again, too late, and said he was only talking about stress. He said he meant reputations. He said people get hurt by rumors. I didn't react emotionally. I did what I always do when someone tries to threaten me without leaving proof. I asked the compliance lead if she wanted that statement noted. She looked at Elliot like he was a stain. She said yes. The patient relations rep typed something. The tablet administrator stared at Elliot as if trying to memorize his face for a report. Jenna started crying. Real this time. She said she didn't want this. She said she loved me. She said she was scared. She said she made a mistake. She said she didn't think it would go this far. I looked at her and felt something in my chest flicker. Not pity, not anger, just a flat exhaustion. I told her I didn't make it go this far. I told her she did. I told her she lied to spend the night with him. I told her she came back asking why I wouldn't visit, while he tried to label me unsafe. I told her the hospital had a record now, and records don't care about tears. The compliance lead ended the meeting. She said discharge planning would proceed without Elliot's involvement. She said Jenna's safety plan would be documented as relocation to her sister's home due to relationship conflict, not violence. She said my statement and evidence would remain in the file. She said any further intimidation attempts should be reported immediately. Elliot stood up slowly. He adjusted his badge like it still meant something. Then he leaned down to Jenna's ear and whispered something I couldn't hear. Jenna's crying stopped for a second, like someone had flipped a switch. Maya pushed Jenna toward the door. Elliot followed them out, but before he left, he looked back at me one last time. His eyes weren't calm anymore. They were calculating, like a man who had lost control of a room and decided he would reclaim control somewhere else. I stayed seated until everyone left. Then I gathered my folder, slid it under my arm, and walked out into the hallway. Halfway to the elevator, my phone buzzed with a notification from the doorbell app. Motion detected. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. The man in the cap was back. And this time, he wasn't trying the lock. He was standing close to the camera, staring straight into it, like he wanted me to see him clearly. Then he raised his hand and held up something small and shiny. A key. My old spare key. And the clip cut off right as he reached for the door. I was still in the hospital parking garage when the doorbell clip ended. The man in the cap held my old spare key up to the lens like a joke. Then the feed cut right as his hand moved toward my door. I didn't drive fast. Fast looks guilty in your own head. I drove clean. Straight lines, no weaving. I called the building office first because paperwork beats adrenaline every time. The property manager answered on the second ring, breathy like I had interrupted lunch. I told him there was an active attempted entry at my unit right now. I told him I had live doorbell footage and the person had my old spare key. I told him to send building security to my floor and meet me at the elevator. He started asking questions. I cut him off with one sentence. I said, "This is an active trespass with a key." He stopped asking questions after that. I parked, took my folder, then left it in the glove box. I didn't need a folder for this part. I needed 2 hands free and a clear head. As I walked into the lobby, I saw the night doorman on duty. He recognized me and his face tightened, like he had already heard the rumors and was now watching the last act. I told him a stranger was attempting to enter my unit with a compromised key. I told him to watch the hallway monitors and keep eyes on anyone leaving fast. I didn't ask him to do anything illegal. I asked him to witness. He nodded and stood up straight, like he finally understood he wasn't just holding doors tonight. The elevator felt slow. Every floor light blinked like a countdown. My phone buzzed again. Motion detected. I opened the app. The man in the cap had stepped back, listening. Then he leaned in again and tried the old key in the lock. It didn't turn. The new lock held. He tried once more, harder, then looked up at the camera like he wanted it to record his frustration. That look wasn't random. It was a message. I reached my floor and the elevator doors opened into a hallway that smelled like laundry detergent and someone's burned dinner. Normal life, same as always. That's what made it worse. Halfway down the hall, I saw him. Same cap, same hunched posture. He stood at my door, shoulder angled, hand low near the lock. He hadn't noticed me yet. He was focused on the metal like it had betrayed him. Behind him, 2 doors down, a neighbor cracked her door open just enough to see. Her eyes flicked to me, then back to him. She didn't step out. She didn't need to. She was already a witness. The man heard my steps and turned. We stared at each other for a beat that felt longer than it was. Up close, he looked younger than I expected. Late 20s, maybe. Not a hardened criminal. More like a guy who gets paid to scare people. He raised his hands, palms out, the universal sign of innocence that always arrives after the crime. I didn't shout. Shouting is what they want. Shouting gives them the unsafe husband narrative. I kept my voice flat and loud enough for the neighbor to hear. I told him to step away from my door. He tried to smile like we were about to negotiate. He said he was just looking for Jenna's things. He said Jenna asked him to pick up a bag. He said he had a key, so it wasn't breaking in. I said the lock was changed yesterday due to unauthorized entry. I said the key in his hand was no longer valid. I said he had no permission to be here. I said he needed to leave now. He glanced down the hall, toward the stairwell, like he was calculating the fastest exit. Then he looked back at me and tried to switch tactics. He said I didn't understand who I was messing with. He said I should be careful. He said people who make complaints regret it. There it was. The real job. I took one step closer, staying between him and my door, keeping my hands visible. I told him my doorbell camera already had his face and the key on video. I told him the building manager and doorman were already involved. I told him the next step was simple. I said he could walk away calmly, or he could stay and explain it to responding officers. He flinched at the word officers. Not because he was scared of prison, because he was scared of paper. He started backing away, slow, eyes never leaving mine. Then he turned and moved toward the stairwell. I followed at a distance, not chasing. Chasing creates stories. I just stayed close enough that he couldn't circle back to my door. The property manager and a security guard stepped out of the stairwell door at the same time the man reached it. Perfect timing. Like the building finally decided to act like it cared about tenants. The security guard blocked the stairwell entrance with his body. The property manager looked at the cap guy, then at me, then at the security guard. The man tried to pivot again. He said he was hired. He said he was told it was allowed. He said he wasn't trying to hurt anyone. The property manager asked him who hired him. The man hesitated. That's when you know a name is toxic. I said nothing. I let the silence do the work, the same way I did in the hospital meeting. Silence forces choices. The man reached into his jacket like he was going for a phone. The security guard tensed. I tensed. The neighbor door opened wider behind us. The man pulled out a laminated visitor pass, not a weapon. He held it up like proof he belonged somewhere. It wasn't a building pass. It wasn't even for our property. It was a vendor badge for a private security firm, and on the badge holder clip was a small white label with a typed name, E. Price. My stomach went cold, not from surprise, but from confirmation. Elliot didn't just talk, Elliot sent bodies. The property manager saw the label and frowned. He asked the man again who hired him. The man swallowed and said he got the job through a scheduler. He said the request came in this morning. He said the client name was Price. He said he was told to retrieve property and make sure the husband understands. Make sure the husband understands. That was Elliot's language, dressed up in someone else's hands. The security guard told the man to sit on the floor against the wall. The man hesitated. The guard repeated it, calm and firm. The man sat. The property manager looked at me and asked if I wanted them to call police. This time I said yes. Not for revenge, for documentation. The doorman arrived a minute later with a phone in his hand, already on speaker with dispatch. He gave the unit number, the floor, and said there was a trespass attempt with a key and a vendor badge. His voice was steady. Witness voice. While we waited, I took my phone out and recorded the vendor badge clip and the name label. I didn't shove it in anyone's face. I just captured it like inventory. Then I asked the neighbor who had been watching to step into the hallway for a second. She did, reluctantly. I asked her if she saw him try the lock. She nodded and said yes. I asked her if she was willing to tell that to an officer. She said yes, if she had to. Her voice shook, but she stayed. When the officers arrived, it was quick and clinical. They separated us. They asked the man for ID. He handed it over. He tried to explain he was hired for a pickup. The officer asked who hired him. The man said he didn't want trouble. The officer said trouble was already here. I gave my statement in simple terms. Doorbell footage, old spare key. Lock changed, attempted entry today, vendor badge with client label, witness neighbor, building staff present, no yelling, no drama. The officer looked at the vendor badge, then asked the man if he knew Elliot Price. The man avoided eye contact and said he only got a client name. The officer asked the property manager if the man had permission to be on the floor. The property manager said no. He said the resident changed locks due to unauthorized entry already documented. The officer told the man he was being issued a trespass notice and would be removed from the property. The officer warned him that returning would result in arrest. Not a cinematic takedown, just a legal line in the sand. That was all I needed. As the officers walked the man to the elevator, he turned his head and looked at me once, like he wanted me to feel fear. I didn't give him fear. I gave him a nod, the kind you give someone who just delivered your final piece of proof. Because now I had something Elliot couldn't explain away. Not tears, not accusations, not my word against theirs. A vendor badge tied to his name on my hallway floor, in front of building staff and a neighbor, with a police trespass notice filed. I went back inside, locked the door, and stood in my quiet apartment for 2 breaths. Then I opened my laptop and drafted 1 email. To compliance, to patient relations, to the administrator overseeing the review. Subject line, escalation. Attempted unauthorized entry linked to staff member. I attached the doorbell clip, the vendor badge photo, and the incident report number. I kept the message short. Dates, times, facts, no emotion. I hit send. And right as the email left my outbox, my phone buzzed with a new notification from the hospital system. Elliot Price, employment status update. Administrative leave had just turned into termination for cause. And for the first time in weeks, the silence that followed didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a door finally closing.